You about ready to start up? Okay.
Let's do it. Hey, everybody. This is a workshop. That means it's informal. We'll see who's around. It looks like everybody's here. Anybody gone? Everyone seems to be here.
And I think we have Drew online tonight.
Drew, you out there?
All right, we'll keep an eye out for her.
Okay, I'm here. So, all right, so why don't we start up? Okay, first one is we got the agreements we do each year. We got one with Keenan Bean for legal services, one for Lancatelli for engineering, and one for John Clark for planning. Chris, these are all yours, I guess.
Yes. So we usually do these in January, and I'm trying to get a little bit ahead of ourselves because, like, these technically expire at the end of December. So I'm trying to get things like agreements. We'll be bringing you insurance next week, so that's in place. So we've asked our attorney, our engineer, and our planner to give us updates. We've negotiated the prices with them for very, very modest increases. And in fact, on the legal services, I was able to get a lot more under the retainer that we pay on a monthly basis. So things that normally would have been charged to us off of the retainer, like just any kind of small disciplinary action or labor questions, we automatically would have gotten billed on that. And we haven't been using the hours like we did a few years ago. So what I did is I said, rather than us asking you about, I don't know, I'm using the attorney differently, and what it's allowed us to do is get more of those paid services under the retainer. And so I'm pretty pleased with how Keenan Bean has worked out with us. Similarly with the engineer, John Russo, he's really a pleasure to work with for me. I need things done on a tight deadline. Like we're trying now to get an application in for CDBG, which is due in like 2.5 weeks, and he's already sending a survey crew out to help get some of the information we need. And then with John Clark, again, when I've asked for things that need to be done, I felt that he's been responsive. So I feel confident that we should continue with the three of these. I've negotiated, some new things with them on how I want to operate, particularly with the legal services, and I am comfortable for another year. So I wanted to bring those three. You have the proposals in your packets. You'll see Keenan Bean went up just slightly. 1 year, there was no increase. Most of these increases are around, for Keenan Bean, it's about a 4% increase, which is pretty reasonable. And again, with the value that I got from putting other things under the retainer, we've actually saved more than $100,000 a year just having those things like IMRIN sales not be charged on an hourly basis but come under the retainer.
Chris, I took a look at the contract we passed the beginning of this year, and I appreciate the number of hours per month, I believe, also being called out in the contract. I'm wondering, related to that, are you currently tracking how many hours a month we spend within the retainer, or plan to track that with them moving forward?
Yes. I've tracked that since the day I started because I wanted to get my head around, a retainer doesn't always define the number of hours, but generally it ends up being in a range, and so I wanted to figure out what we were getting, what those were being attributed to, and then be more selective in what we were attributing to into the retainer. Basically, we've averaged somewhere to 80 to 85 hours a month on that retainer. But again, there were things that we would do that I wouldn't have prioritized. And then other things like property sales and particularly labor questions, we'd be charged $225 or $240 an hour. So we've largely stopped that and brought that under the retainer. So again, it's not going to be exactly 80 hours every month. It varies by season and month. But it was the first time we put on paper, like, this is roughly equivalent to 80 hours on average a month.
Yeah,
So it's about $200, less than $200 an hour,
right.
which I think is fair in this market.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious, as much as is practical for you to get an update, because I know particularly there are times when we bring up things on city council that involve legal support. We'd like legal support, and sometimes you've shared that, we need to kind of be conscious of that. So I think the more you can then share with us kind of where we are overall, I think that would be helpful for us to understand some of those decisions and priorities.
Yeah, I
should be
mean,
making.
we've mostly stayed in the range. Like, there's some months, we don't have a lot going on, like in the middle of summer or in December. And then there's other months where we're almost over 100 hours. So I keep an eye on it. If we get like in a deficit, I definitely will let you know. Like, I'm trying to more modify the way my office uses the hours. You guys have a certain number of questions and things that you want done. And what I've tried to do is modify how I use them by setting 2 weekly meetings that are very structured and have an agenda, and they've helped us manage the time better. But I definitely will let you know if, like, okay, we're running out of hours.
Great, thank you.
Chris, I have a question. So there seems to be a new need of our attorneys, or something we haven't done in a while, which is the trainings. Jennifer Gray recommended that there would be that there was training required for the planning board because they didn't, really grasp their kind of full power, I think was her words. And some of us on the council have been asking for a training with regards to pilot, but I think long-term training for the council is a good idea. I agree with Clark Gebman that who has said several times that there needs to be more rigorous training, and I agree. Where in the pricing would those trainings fall if we asked for that?
Well, so we did trainings when the new term started, right? We did use some number of hours in the preparation and the conducting of those trainings that we did for the council. This year, we don't have to replicate that. We probably will have a smaller training for the planning folks. We only have one opening that I think we'll be bringing to you in 2 weeks, candidate. And again, what we do is Jennifer Gray has usually done that under the retainer. She'll email out all of the information about their duties and then do a personal call, because it's just one person. Again, if you want a broader, we were talking about this today, trying to understand if we need a broader public training, and I think Nick was going to go back and talk to Jennifer Gray, who does that.
Okay.
But
For
again,
the planning board, you mean?
yeah, but again, I think that's a minimal thing.
Mhm.
Like, the thing that draws out a lot of expense are prolonged discipline and litigative matters,
I see.
and we've been working to avoid those.
Mhm.
I thought, well, I've been to zoning board and planning board meetings where they spend the first half hour or hour doing training stuff.
Yes.
And so I think that's already built in.
Mm.
I think whether there's additional ones, I don't know, but I've sat through those and actually find them helpful, so.
I wonder what she had in mind then when she said that to us, if she's already doing trainings.
I think she was just trying to be more specific about the issues that were being brought
I
up
see.
at the time.
Okay.
But yeah, they do have a half-hour training
Yeah,
session
yeah,
before everything.
that's right.
Because in addition to an initial training that they get from Jennifer Clark, they have to do a certain number of hours to comply with the state's regulations. And Drew is on, and Drew, we're talking about the training of planning board members. And you and I talked about that briefly earlier, about Jennifer doing something with the new members and/or the existing board. Did you have a chance to talk to her more?
No, I apologize. She has not gotten back to me yet, but the planning board and the zoning board are required to do 4 hours a year. tracked now by Amanda Caputo. And like the mayor said, the first 30 minutes of every planning board, or most planning board meetings, and the first 30 minutes of every ZBA meeting, we'll do a training session, and it's usually about either a topic that the planning board asks about, or I like to do for the ZBA, either case law updates, or we'll talk about conditions, and every couple months we'll do a complete refresher on all the responsibilities of the zoning board of appeals.
And all these training sessions, I know the ones obviously prior to the meetings for planning and zoning, but any further training sessions, could they be open to the public? Because I think it's a matter of training the public as well as the boards themselves. I don't know if I'm...
I mean,
I think it is open.
the ones that are before the planning board meetings are in public.
Yeah, I know. But
but-
if we were to do an extra one, I'm suggesting...
Well, it's kind of, if you think about it in terms of there's an initial orientation. And because we don't, it's not a cohort like we had with your group where 4 new members are coming in, we essentially should all walk through this together. In this case, you're going to have probably 1 new member of the ZBA, 1 new member of the planning board, and it's probably more efficient for them to do a one-on-one with Jennifer. If there's a specific topic that you want to see at the meetings, we can also do that. Maybe there's a more basic thing that we do at the beginning of the year, saying, just want to remind you, this is what the planning board does, this is what its authority is.
Well, I mean, if Jennifer, oh, I'm sorry.
Well, my understanding is that some of those trainings are about specific topics, and some of those trainings are in general about how the planning board works and doesn't work. And I had made a request to know what those dates were so that the public can reference them. I don't know that we need to necessarily do the same trainings over and over again for the same planning board members, but those trainings, I think, could be a little more accessible to the public. So if people do have a question, we can say, well, on this, if you go to this YouTube link, that will give you the 30-minute version of this. So I don't know under whose purview it might be to create a catalog of some sort, but being able to refer back to them, I think, would be helpful.
Well, the other thing is they may be packageable, right? We can stick them online, especially if we have, those meetings are videotaped, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
maybe we can do that.
they're on YouTube. It's just a matter of, do you scroll through the city's entire YouTube page and guess what the topic of that training was? It's just not very user-friendly.
I like the idea of it being packageable, because I have seen one case, I don't know how often it comes up, that sometimes they do some small things before the training, just because that person said they had to leave, and so they're like, okay. So it just, makes it that much more easier. But I like your idea generally, Paloma, of knowing on which date is which one, because to agree with Lee, some of them are really interesting, and I learn from them as well.
Well, but if it's going to be training, we should pull that out from that meeting and set it up as a separate labeled event, right? Training on this topic. For
Yeah.
ZBA, the fundamentals are probably doable in a couple of meetings, like, the distinction between a use variance versus an area variance and what the criteria are. Those could be packaged in probably a couple half-hour shots and then labeled as such so they're not attached to the individual meetings where the trainings occur,
Right.
right?
Yeah. If there's bandwidth for that, that would be ideal.
Yeah.
Where do they do the training? It's not out here,
Yeah, it's right there.
is it?
Yeah.
I thought last time I was at a planning board meeting, there was nobody here until like 7:40, and then everybody came out.
Maybe there wasn't a training that time.
Maybe, okay. I guess where I was going with it was Jennifer raised the concern, so I guess I'd like to know what she's doing about the concern that she raised, and when she'll be satisfied that the concern has been addressed.
And the concern is?
She was concerned that it was kind of broad, that the planning board didn't seem to know their full power and they needed more trainings. But we didn't really ask many follow-up questions, but it was definitely something that registered with me.
Drew, can you follow up with Jennifer on that?
Yes, writing it down, I will talk to Jen first thing tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll see what it would take to do the videos. I don't know that I can go back, forever, but
Yeah, I mean, it would be listed in the minutes, so that might be easier to scroll than listening to every YouTube video.
It was executive session, I believe, when we talked to her.
Oh, no, I mean the
Oh.
catalog
Oh,
of the
right, okay.
packaging, the trainings.
And I know for the zoning board of appeals, I try to do a PowerPoint for every training session, so I can try and pull those as well. We can maybe get those posted on the city's website labeled with what the training is.
This is coming from my part from a specific request from a constituent to have this information a little more accessible. So I think I'm sure I'm not the only person getting that feedback.
I mean, I think that's the right way to go, too. We're also looking at doing that with our resolutions. Like, if you go to try to find one of our resolutions, it's really hard. And you have to know what you're looking for. Whereas on some public websites, it just has a listing in chronological order with the number and then a description of the title. So Ben has been working on that. We're going to hope to launch that in January as well. So like having these areas of the website that are easily navigated is navigable is helpful. And I know that our videographer, Pete, has taken our ZBA and planning stuff and he's moving it so that it's easier to find. You don't have to dig through city council meetings and you just go right there.
Okay. Next one is the long local law to amend 119. This is about the uniform fire code, the building code, the energy conservation construction code, and I don't know more than that. Drew, you're going to tell us about this?
Drew pulled the short straw on this one.
All right.
So last week, we talked about going through kind of line by line of why the changes were being made, what the changes are. So I'm going to share my screen. Oh, Ben. And I think everyone has what I'm going to show in the packet, so you can follow along, but we'll kind of talk line by line.
You should be good, Drew.
And Drew, just for a little context, this law does what? I mean, a lot of people may hear uniform code and they don't know what it does, but could you give just a little primer on that?
Absolutely. So in 2020, New York State updated the Uniform Code and the State Energy Code. As a result, the state then updated its regulations that pertain to the administration and enforcement of the State Uniform Code and the State Energy Code. And those regulations are set forth in 19 NYCRR Part 1203 and were officially adopted in December of 2021. The state then gave instructions that all municipalities had to update their administration and enforcement provisions of the State Uniform Code and Energy Code to comply with the new regulation. And we have to make these updates by December 31st, 2022. So we are on a little bit of a timeline, and all these changes you'll see as we go through, they're mandated by the state. They are set forth in the regulations in Part 1203, so you can kind of see word for word where this language comes from.
Sorry, Drew, I just wanted to interject because it's helpful for me. I looked it up. The Uniform Code stands for the Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code. So this law is mainly about what we do to regulate and enforce fire and building standards, and the Energy Code is the Energy Conservation Construction Code. So just to give those listening in a general sense of the topic that we're talking about. Back to you, Drew.
Right, and these regulations are, thank you very much, and these regulations are already set forth in Chapter 119 of the City Code. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're really just kind of beefing up and slightly amending Chapter 119 so that it matches Part 1203 and what the state is requiring us to do. So these changes have been reviewed with our new building inspector, Bruce, so that he is well aware of what the requirements are and what the state's expectations are going forward. The state also issued out a model law. Beacon's Chapter 119 is very similar to the model law, so it's actually very easy to add in the update, so it worked out very nicely. So we started off amending the definition section to add in the new definition that the state has adopted. So they added a definition for assembly area, they added a definition for the fire code, hazardous production materials. You'll see everything in red and underlined is new language. If it's not red and it's not underlined, then that is the existing language in the code, and we're not touching that. That stays the same. So just go through.
It was very important that we define sugar house in Beacon.
That's my favorite
Did you
one.
get that, Jeff? Sugar house. Okay. This does not mean a bar, by the way.
There is no room for creativity. I did not come up with Sugar House. I didn't think of this. I cannot take
Should be a
any
sugar
credit.
shack.
Just folded
That's what
it
I always
in
call it.
to what we have. Again, you'll see, so there, everything that everything that's black, we didn't do any changes. We're just amending all of chapter 119 to make it easier to send up to the state to demonstrate that, look, our enforcement program complies with everything you wanted us to comply with. The state changed language around about building permit exemption. If it's not stated in Part 1203, then it cannot be exempt. So there were a couple things that Beacon had that are no longer permitted as exemptions. Again, this is not, we don't have any discretion here. This is a mandate. So if it's not in the list of exemptions, it will require a building permit. Although, I do want to clarify one thing about swimming pools. Swimming pools that are less than 24 inches do not require a building permit under the Uniform Code. The state's logic with taking it out of Part 1203 was that if it's not part of the Uniform Code, it does not need to be regulated and it does not need to be listed. So, yes, this is crossed out, and I know I said that everything not in this list requires a building permit, but there's still the overarching Uniform Code that governs. So swimming pools that are less than 24 inches are not subject to the Uniform Code.
Do you mean 24 inches deep, Drew? Is
Yes.
the depth of the pool? Okay, thank you.
Like a
Yes,
kiddie
water depth
pool.
24 inches. Yes, exactly. This is about little kiddie pools.
Sorry, maybe the logic, the reverse logic is hurting my head. The 24 inches are no longer exempted, which means they are allowed without a building permit, right?
They are allowed to have a building permit.
Right.
That is correct. The state said that it was duplicative to list them as exempt when they were never subject to the Uniform Code.
Cool.
And that came up in their, in the comments to the regulations. So actually, if anyone can't fall asleep at night and you want to read all the comments and questions that went into preparing the regulations, swimming pools was one of those, why did you take it out? And then that's how we came to realize that they believed it was duplicative.
Where are those comments and questions?
Those are on the state's page for the creation of these regulations. I will necessarily.
We can circulate it.
Thank you.
You can find them on the internet, but don't look. I'll send them to you right after I'm finished talking,
Thank you, Drew.
and then everyone will sleep very nicely tonight when you read through them. Just write this up a little note to remember, short-term memory. Great, so those are building permits. The state also beefed up what is required for applications for building permits. There are specific things they're looking for in applications that we didn't previously have. Again, so that's, they wanted more of a description than we previously provided. They want more information about any affected building or structure. They set forth very clear standards for the construction documents. Again, this language is all from Part 1203, setting forth the requirements for what is needed for construction documents. And that's all this language comes right from that. Again, we're not changing anything about the time period for building permits. Fees are all going to be stay the same as they're set forth in the fee schedule. Construction inspections, the only thing we had to add, or I'm sorry, we had to add a couple things about what this pertains to what needs to be inspected. These are the elements of work to be inspected during the construction process.
I'm sorry, I had a question just about the fee schedule, and I think this might be more for Chris, I don't know, but I saw that it said that the city council sets the fee schedule, and is that something that at one point we talked about at all, or something that I just missed? Or is that something that we do at some point, just like look over it? I'm sure the department heads are pretty good at setting the prices that they need to set, but is that something that we as a council actually look at?
I think the council passed that before I became administrator, and then under the code or under some past practice, if we don't exceed it by 10%, we don't come back. So we've only made minor changes to the fee schedule. But Drew, maybe we could talk to Nick about what's required of us on that and make sure we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, so the fee schedule is adopted by resolution, and so anytime that we go in and make any substantial changes to the fee schedule, it comes back to the city council for review. Anytime we adopt a new local law that requires a new fee to be set, then that amends the fee schedule, and that comes before the city council, and the fee schedule is available to the public and it's posted online. So we can bring it back to the city council review at any time, and it can just be amended by resolution.
Yeah, we'll look into that more.
Yeah.
And is the update of all of this, does that something that just impacts the fee schedule or no?
No.
Okay, great.
We can change the fees if the city council wants to, but that can be done, again, that's not on the same timeline, that can be done at any time. We are not adding any new fees because of this law, we're not changing any fees because of this law, so the fee schedule is staying the same.
Great, thank you.
Oh. One thing that's new, and I think is really interesting, and probably a result of COVID, is the state added this option for remote inspections. It's not mandatory, but if the building inspector feels that a remote inspection would be sufficient to satisfy whatever element that they're inspecting, then they can do it remotely. And I think this came up because there was an inability to get things done during COVID because you were required to do an in-person inspection, and and so it caused a lot of jam-ups. But they believe that remote inspections can be sufficient in certain cases to look at various elements of construction. Now that's within the building inspector's discretion as to whether or not he's satisfied that a remote inspection is appropriate, whether he wants to do it. The state is just making it an option, and so we're putting it in the code to again give us that option. I don't know how often it'll be utilized, but again, it's there.
I think
It's new, and I think it's an outcome of COVID.
I don't think we'd use it unless there was a very serious resumption or new pandemic.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah, like this is mostly in person, or all in person.
Yeah, absolutely. And
It's good to have that option, though. I mean, if you had asked me 5 years ago, like, would we have had COVID for 2 years, I would have gone, you're crazy. Now,
Well, just since we're putting it in the code, how exactly does a remote inspection work?
we've never done one.
We've never done
Yeah,
it.
well, it would be done using a camera, so an individual would walk around, whether it's, let's say they just poured foundation today, let's go back to our elements of construction, let's say they just put up framing and it needed to be inspected, it would all be done with a camera, even just a simple cell phone camera, where you're FaceTiming and you're walking around and you're showing live what is there.
And again, I would just say there's a clear thing here that says it has to be performed to the same level and quality as an in-person inspection. So again, we're not going to use this to cut any corners. This is a vital part.
Absolutely not. And, you know, the building inspectors, Bruce is very familiar with, you know, these elements that have to be inspected and whether a remote inspection would even work. I know
That's
sometimes
right.
you want to have your hands on, I'm sure you probably want to have your hands on the framing just to, I'd give it a little shake, but what do I know? Anyway, it's an option. It might not ever be used. It is just a new provision that the state says, you know, you should include in your codes. The state also wants...
Well, sorry, while we're still on that, if for whatever reason, I don't want to get stuck on this, but if for whatever reason there is a remote inspection done instead of an in-person inspection, is that something that gets marked or noted in the record or something like that?
I don't know. It could, I think we have to see how it's done. There has to be an inspection. So you're gonna do your inspection results, so there's clearly something that comes out. You do your inspection, and then you have to prepare your inspection results. You know, we can make it a practice that the inspection results mark whether or not it was in person or remote. At this time, you know, since this is brand new and it's never been used,
Right.
The inspection result, I don't know if it's a form or how he does it or how he's going to do it. But we can talk to him about that, about noting whether or not it's in person or remote.
We have a tracking system for inspections, and I'm sure we can figure out a way to track that so that it's highlighted that it was remote. I don't ever see our team ever wanting to even use this, but again, it's not bad to have the tool in case something that we don't envision right now happens.
Right. So then, you know, we get to the inspection results. One thing the state has mandated is that all inspection results include a citation to specific code provisions that have not been met. Some building inspectors issued more generalized statements that, you know, your door isn't secure. That's an example. But now it's okay, your door's not secure. That's a violation of this section of the Uniform Code. So just being a little bit more specific. Those staff work orders. This is just some clarifying language that we added. Let's see, where are we? Certificates of occupancy. The state has requested some additional information be included in the certificate of occupancy. So that's all that. This language is just kind of cleaning up the language about temporary certificates of occupancy. Now, operating permits was a big change. The state went in and added some, like 26 categories of operating permits. Now, a lot of these we don't have in Beacon. This is where the sugar house comes into play. If we have a sugar
Fruit and
house-
crop ripening.
Yeah.
So we don't have any sugar houses.
But the idea
Not yet.
behind it is, yeah.
That's
The idea behind leaving all these, now the state says that yes, if you wanted to, you could exempt 1 through 7. But that would mean that if those uses ever come to your municipality, they're not going to be getting operating permits. And that's not what we desire. And I'm sorry, it should be A1, little a through, you can exempt through G. In talking with Bruce, the preference is to not exempt any of these, even though, again, we don't have fruit and crop ripening and we don't have sugar houses. But what if in the future any of these uses decided to come to Beacon? They would be required to get an operating permit. So these are only applicable if they're coming into the city, and then they would be required to get an operating permit and fill out the application for an operating permit and get an inspection for that operating permit. Again, this information, for inspections, the state again has allowed for remote inspections for operating permits as well. So the remote inspection, it still is an option even in this category.
I had a question specifically around the tents and temporary special event structures. So if somebody wanted to put up like a tent in their yard for a wedding, would they have to then get an operating permit for that? And if so, like, how does the inspection work? Because usually that's something that gets set up like the day of or the week of, and not necessarily like a month beforehand or so.
Yeah, so you have to contact the building department and give them information about that tent. Some tents might be exempt. It depends on how big they are. And they'd be exempt because they're not regulated by the uniform code. So it would depend. If you're throwing a wedding and you're putting a very large tent structure up, that's going to, be placed in a day or two or a couple days before the event. Yes, it's going to require an operating permit, and you're going to want to contact the building department to make sure that everything is okay. And again, it's about safety, because now you're putting up a very large tent, and if that, God forbid, collapses, people could be at risk. So that's why the operating permit is so important. But again, it's going to depend on the size of the tent, and I don't know that number off the top of my head.
And we do this like when we've had festivals down at the riverfront and they propose tents, we do that. What I've been told is that if it's done by a professional company, they know how to do this, so there's no issue. So I think we have a comfort level with vendors that we know have set these up and never had an issue. And then, again, if somebody's just doing it on their own, it might be more of an inspection just to make sure that the stakes aren't going to fall out or the wind's going to have this thing blow. But we do regulate them, like when we do those events.
Okay. Cool. And this isn't something we really have flexibility in, right? This is just the state has set these codes, and that's what it is. I know a lot of people like to get married in Beacon, and granted, we do have venues, but I want to make sure that this, as we set this forth, that we're not creating a workload that's overbearing for our building department. And
This
the capacity
really,
that we have now.
it doesn't change
Okay.
what we're doing.
Great.
And there's not a ton of these tents,
Yeah.
And Bruce is aware of all these new requirements, and we've reviewed each one of these and had the discussion, do any of these need to be exempt? And, it's his position that for the safety of the residents and the members of the public, other members of the public, it's important that these operating permits exist.
Drew, a question for you that I don't know if it's going to fall into this eventually, but the Office of, what is it called? New York State Office of Cannabis Management was supposed to be issuing regulations with regards to the operation of smoke shops, dispensaries and smoke bars, and we chose not to opt out of either of those. But I did at the time when we had the discussion voice a concern about the smoke shops or the smoke bars, and a small business owner on Main Street expressed concern recently about what is going to play out here. Do we see those regulations showing up in our code, or are they just going to be state regulations that those businesses have to follow? And to what extent would we be able to adapt those regulations?
Yeah, so actually, it's going to be a combination between the state issuing regulations and then the city being able to adopt local regulations to supplement what the state did. The state has issued a proposed regulations for retail dispensaries only. Those regulations are available on the Cannabis Control Board website. Like I said, for retail dispensaries, they also touch upon aspects of the social equity program, and they pertain to, they establish different setback requirements that these facilities would have to follow. They establish notification requirements that retail dispensary licensees would have to notify the city. those were issued, there's a 60-day comment period. We anticipate that they're going to be changing a lot. They're pretty vague. I was a little disappointed in how they came out, but anyway, that's besides the point. So they just were posted last week, actually. So the 60-day comment period has just started. So if you want to take a look, and I can actually send them around to you, but once those are adopted, the city should consider then adopting different zoning regulations to regulate retail dispensaries. Now, the state at this time is issuing conditional retail dispensary licenses. They're issuing 150. I think they issued 32 last week. There is currently a stay for the Hudson Valley and for Brooklyn, so the CCB cannot issue any licenses for our area. So, with all that being said, yes, this is going to happen in the future, and we're going to want to consider adopting regulations in our zoning code. That doesn't have anything to do with Chapter 119, and it's not going to be happening urgently, because the state is in this, first they're dealing with this litigation, and they're only issuing conditional retail dispensaries very slowly.
Thank you very
But
much.
again, I will circulate some more information on that if you'd like.
Thank you, I'd love that. I'd really like to know how people can give public feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be in the materials I send you.
Great.
And for members of the public who won't get my email, if you go to the if you just Google Cannabis Control Board and you go to their main website and look up their regulations, they have a chart about proposed regulations and then how to issue comments. So any member of the public can issue comments. Oh, also on-site retail dispensaries. That's even further down the line. The state hasn't even touched upon conditional on-site licenses. They haven't issued regulations. They haven't talked about how applicants can get those licenses. So that's a ways off. We will not be seeing on-site consumption facilities come into our communities anytime soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. So operating permits each have a set time frame for which they're good, which they're valid, and this is all set by the state. These time periods. You'll see the fee language is underlined. Operating permits already have fees set forth in the fee schedule, but I noticed that they didn't have a provision under their operating permit section. So I just added this language to match every other section so that it's clear that you can find this amount in the fee schedule so that members of the public can easily kind of figure out what something might cost. It wasn't as clear before. That brings us to fire safety and property maintenance inspections. What is new, and I think a lot of building inspectors across the state are frustrated with, is this section here, A2. The state has mandated that you add language that you have to do fire safety and property maintenance inspections for schools, colleges. That wasn't previously done by municipalities. It was done by the Office of, it's the OFPC, I'm scrolling just, Office of Fire Prevention and Control. Now, the Office of Fire Prevention and Control will continue to do the inspections for our public schools and private schools and colleges, but now the state says, okay, that's fine, but they have to submit a report to the municipality. That report has to be reviewed by the code enforcement officer, and he has to be satisfied that the inspection is sufficient to satisfy the requirements of the state regulations. Previously, the OFPC would just do the inspection and move on, but now they are requiring that the city be involved in reviewing those inspections. And if we do not think they're sufficient, we do have to step in and either ask OFPC to make a correction, re-perform the inspection, or the city has to go in and do it themselves. So this, again, is mandated language. We have to follow this. That's just the rule. We've made Bruce aware that this is a requirement. I'm sure he's been talking to all his other building inspector buddies because this has been a big complaint across the state. I don't know the rhyme or reason behind it, to be honest, of why the state set it up that way, but, that's how they did it. A big intersection is condition assessments of parking garages. This is new to Part 1203, but building inspectors have known that this is coming. So they have been working with parking garages to make sure the right inspection's done. I don't think Beacon has a lot of parking garage structures, so this is less of a big deal for Beacon. But again, the language is mandated that we include it in the code. So it's just the parking garages require condition assessments. And they have to be done periodically, all that stuff.
Drew, do you know, does this pertain to parking that's underneath buildings? I don't know if we have any standalone parking structures, but we do have some parking beneath buildings or some buildings under construction that will have that.
Yes, the parking under the structures would also be subject to this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there's no room for creativity in here. This is all straight from the 1203. Complaints have always existed, record keeping. We just had to add one about the condition assessment reports being part of the record keeping. It is always done with program review and reporting. And then we have our enforcement and our penalties, which are staying the same. And, I'm sorry, this is the last new section was climatic and geographic design criteria. So this is just additional requirements that the state set forth to be included when you're looking at various projects. So you're supposed to consider the climatic and geographic design criteria for buildings and structures within the city. Again, this is also something that it has been looked at. It just was never set forth in the code as clearly as it is going to be once we adopt this local law. So it's not it looks like a lot and a little bit of a shock, but it's things that have already really been incorporated. We're just setting it forth in chapter 119. And that's it.
This might be more of a Chris question, but in 119.14a, the code enforcement officer shall annually submit to the city council. Is that something that when do we receive this written report and summary of?
Tell me the section again,
So
please.
page 21, 119.14a, and we get a report and summary of all transactions and activities described in 119.13, record keeping, summary of all appeals or litigation pending. I mean, maybe there just isn't any of this.
Let me find out.
Thank you.
I don't think that's taken place to date. But again, we have a new building inspector, and we can do the things differently.
Yeah, it looks like it's required, and, we did get a report.
Yeah, I feel like we've done this on at least a cursory manner, but I don't, let me find out what we have, and, okay, that's page 21.
And it's been a provision in the city code for a long time, as I understand it. So it is possible that some of these requirements get forgotten. So it's good to kind of look this whole chapter over, which is why I didn't go and just amend the sections that needed it. I wanted to make sure the whole chapter was included so we can kind of get our eyes on everything and make any updates that we need to.
Drew, on just a house cleaning thing, on page 4, can we replace the he with the code enforcement officer? That's the only place we're using pronouns, and it doesn't need to be there.
Absolutely. I tried to make sure I avoided all pronouns throughout the whole thing, so I would do another look.
Cool, yeah, it's just 4 in the top of page 5.
There's also one on page 14 into page 15. Code enforcement officer may, in his or her discretion, could just be in their discretion.
Yeah. Cool.
Got it.
Okay. Anything else, folks? All
I
right.
was a little confused by one other, the intermunicipal agreements. I don't know, I just couldn't work it out. What would that be? Do we have any?
What page are you on,
Like
please?
water or water?
23.
Oh, I guess maybe. 11917 on page 20. You said 23, right?
Page 23 of the document, page 68 of the packet.
So my impression is it permits shared services or kind of sharing how one goes about doing this. We have intermunicipal agreements for water and sewer because our area covers more than just the city, but this seems to be specific to the uniform code, so that would say we might have a shared building inspector or something like that.
And if it's intermunicipal, can that also mean between the city and the school district? Or does it have to be city and?
I think it would.
So this would be an area where if we said, oh, the school district can do, I don't know, their own inspections or some, I don't know, it doesn't make sense, but this would be where we do it.
You can't do it that way because the inspections are separately regulated where the school district can do their fire and safety inspections with the OFPC, but they have to be reviewed by the city, so we can't do an intermunicipal agreement to get rid of, that responsibility. But it's more about as the mayor said, building inspector was a great example. Some municipalities don't have building departments at all, and so maybe the county runs that municipality's building department. So that would be an example of an intermunicipal agreement under this category.
Thank you.
The school district would count. I can't think of an example that would be acceptable at this time, but that's not to say that doesn't exist.
Yeah, not in this clause, but when we were looking at building a highway garage, I was interested in sharing the school district's new highway garage, and that would have resulted in an intermunicipal agreement.
Drew, you might have said this in the beginning, but how often does the state update this code? How often does the city council have to adopt it?
I think the last one was 2015. It's not very often that the state goes through and does a complete overhaul like this. This is really the result of the 2020 code changes. So every now and then you might see little changes as the state realizes that some of their mandates weren't working out. They might say, here's the change, and then municipalities can respond to that. This is, at least in my experience, I've been with Keenan since 2016, this is the first overhaul that I've experienced.
And just going back to the question about how this is mandatory, that means no additions and no omissions of any kind. We have to follow the code exactly as it is, right?
Yeah, well, there are municipalities that have beefed up their fire prevention and building codes to require, different requirements like construction management plans or, added different provisions that are kind of outside what the state requires. So you can add provisions if you want. Again, it would just be a matter of is it allowed by the state? Is it preempted in any way? So we have to look through that. But the language that was added here tonight is strictly a result of Part 1203 and is a mandate from the state. That's not to say you can't go and add other things to Chapter 119 or make additional changes that aren't mandated by the state. And that can happen at any time. It's just right now we're focused on the 1203 changes because we have this deadline we're up against with December 31st.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay. Ready to go to sidewalks? I think, Drew, you're still going to be on.
I was going to introduce this just
Okay.
a little bit. So the discussion tonight comes about questions that were raised about how we could budget for sidewalks so that we can begin to rebuild the sidewalk system in Beacon. One of the questions I had, and I asked Drew to work on a memo about is, under what circumstances do private owners have to pay for that versus the city, or there's some shared cost between those, so that we can begin to understand, like, if we're going to invest in sidewalks, firstly, how does that look? Is it going to invoke the private owner having to put up half the amount, or do we have the discretion to say, well, in particular cases, we want to do that because it's on a key corridor and the benefit is more public than it is private? So Drew's going to walk you through that, and we thought this is, again, just kind of a foundational conversation as we move towards our capital program in May. And, you know, again, we are exploring other sidewalk projects that are going to require some money from the city. So I think this is going to keep coming up, and we should kind of just understand what our code says and see if there's anything we might need to change. So, Drew, could you walk us through your framework?
Yeah, absolutely. So we reviewed the city code. That's where all these requirements are set forth. First provision to really look at is City Code Section 191-12.1. This requires that private property owners to maintain their sidewalks. So if there's any damage or defect, the property owner adjacent to that sidewalk is 100% responsible for restoring the sidewalk to a good and safe condition. This happens on notice, so if the city becomes aware that there is a damage or defect, then they'll issue a written notice to the property owner and advise them that they have to repair that defect. If it's not repaired within a certain amount of days, then the city can go in and make the repair and then put that cost against the property owner as a lien. So that's if there's damage or repair. If there's no damage or repair and the city just wants to replace the sidewalk as part of a road improvement project, then the city is 100% responsible for that. And that's set forth in, again, Chapter 191, Section 12.2. This is a newer provision that came about in 2014. Prior to 2014, it was a 50% split. In 2014, the City Council decided they didn't want it to be a 50% split, and that it would be 100% the responsibility of the City Council, and would be part of the annual budget. If the city wanted to install new sidewalks where none previously existed, then that is a 50% split between the city and the property owner. So the city would be responsible for paying the upfront costs, and then the property owner has to repay 50% of the cost over a 10-year period. You know, so these provisions have existed for, you know, a while, and the part about property owners being responsible for sidewalk damage and repairs, that's common in almost all the municipalities. I have not come across a municipality that does not make that requirement. The other two requirements about installation of new sidewalks or just repairing, I shouldn't say repairing, but replacing existing sidewalks, those are a little bit more unique to Beacon. Now, the state gives the municipality the authority to set forth these requirements. It's in both state law, it's public policy, it's supported through case law. So the city is not unique in its program or policy, but these are the requirements that the city has to follow because it is set forth in our city code.
And Drew, while we're on this, could you just, I know this wasn't under the purview of this, but could you just talk a little bit about the maintenance responsibility and the liability and that lying with the private owner?
Yeah.
For like snow removal, you know?
Yeah, that's consistently held up, you know, by the city code provisions and also case law, that a property owner is responsible for maintaining their sidewalk. So that includes snow and ice removal. They alone are responsible. So if someone gets hurt because they slipped and fell on ice in front of their property, the city is not responsible, the city is not liable, that liability remains with the property owner, because the property owner has that responsibility to maintain the sidewalk. That sets the reference to snow and ice maintenance is referenced separately in the city code, chapter 191.
And again, I think we've been trying to address things in a fair and efficient manner. So we had recently, you may have seen somebody out doing grinding of the sidewalks on Main Street where they didn't meet anymore, and we needed to bevel them so that you didn't have a trip and fall hazard. There were over 100 of these things, and just to figure out the billing and go back after all these owners made no sense at all. So what we did is we just did it. It was about $10,000 of work, and it addressed, I think, 143 issues along Main Street. So there are compelling cases. I would argue, like on a Main Street, the benefit is mostly public rather than just the person that lives there. Similarly, like we've done the road project that we're doing on Fishkill Avenue, Teller Avenue, is going to replace all of the existing sidewalks. None of the owners there are going to have to pay for that. In fact, in some cases, we paid them for the right-of-way so that we could install the new sidewalk, which then they're ironically going to be clearing for us. But they didn't have to pay anything for the maintenance.
I noticed that the right-of-way wasn't mentioned in this memo. Will we get to that topic in this discussion?
We can.
Yeah.
What's the question?
I don't know what the question is. Like, the sidewalk itself, like if we want to put a sidewalk, are we claiming property from a private property owner? Is it an easement for public passage? Does the owner still own the sidewalk and they just have a sidewalk on it?
Well, and I'll just add on to that, or was there once a sidewalk there that disintegrated or was removed? And if so, does the city have any record of the sidewalks it put in historically?
Yeah, Drew, do you want to take on any of those, or do you want me to try?
No, I'll get started. The sidewalks are placed in the city's right-of-way. I guess it depends on exactly where the city wanted to place the sidewalk, where someone's private property was. You'd have to evaluate, you'd have to, whether we'd have to purchase that space or whether the property owner would be acceptable with an easement, but that's rare. If you look at our tax map and where sidewalks are, the property lines abut the sidewalk, and the sidewalk remains the city's property, it's public property.
But then that doesn't happen all the time. So like when we survey these things, when we actually do the physical boundary survey, sometimes these lines don't cross. So like the sidewalks we're rebuilding on Teller Avenue, there were places where we had to acquire a little length of property 6 inches wide because we didn't own. And again, as you rebuild these, you want to rebuild them to ADA standards, make sure that they're 5 feet in width, that they have the proper curb ramps. And sometimes in order to do that, you just need these little snippets of property from next door unless you can come out into the roadway a little bit. Sometimes you can't do that because attached to the curbing oftentimes is our stormwater system.
Right, and the easiest way is, like Chris said, to acquire that additional property that you need. That would just be the cleanest way to make sure that, the city can install the sidewalk they want. But it does become, once that sidewalk's installed, the adjacent property owner is responsible for, again, maintaining it and then repairing any damage.
So we acquired 36 of those little properties for the roadway project.
So, sorry, let me back up a second. So if we had a road with, regardless of cost in the next section, if we had a road where we needed to install a sidewalk, that we felt one was needed for safety, we would have to do it on the city property. So you basically be taking away the road, eating a few feet into the road, or we would have to buy the property from the property owner to put a sidewalk there.
Or buy an easement.
Or an easement.
Yeah, some kind of some kind of property interest. It depends, too, on how you fund it. For state and federally funded projects like Teller Fishkill, there's a very prescribed system that you have to use. There's a uniform act under the federal government that tells you what you can and can't do in terms of acquiring. Locally, I think if we just went and fixed somebody's sidewalk, most times they're not going to even raise the objection. And if we're funding it in-house, I think we'll go farther than if we have all the rules under the federal and state process. So again, I think what's weird is on major thoroughfares, like we want a 5-foot sidewalk, but if somebody has a 3-foot sidewalk in their neighborhood and it's, you know, it's enough, it's enough to pass a wheelchair or the minimum width, I think the code allows us to put back what was there. So that gives us a little more flexibility. Under CDBG, though, we are required to go to the 5-foot, so we had to do things like go around trees that I didn't want to take out.
I don't know where this falls in the discussion, but I mean, I know that there are several sidewalks in Beacon that I don't know the exact width of them, but I know they have like telephone poles in the middle of them, and it's impossible to cross over with a stroller or a wheelchair without stepping into the street and or stepping onto a person's property. And I think some streets, like the only way to like make the sidewalks more accessible would be to encroach on somebody's property. Because I'm thinking right now specifically of like Verplank, and there are spots in Verplank that the street's not wide enough to encroach on the street anymore. Right. So is that something that we as a city, or we as a council rather, could like, or would want to start like looking at and trying to figure out what needs addressing, what can we conceptually plan to work on in the future? Is that part of this discussion?
Well, I think you're raising the issue of the utilities that are along the street, and we haven't always controlled where they put those poles. We are moving the utilities for the Fishkill Teller Avenue project, but like in one segment along Fishkill Avenue, we're still going to have poles in the middle because there was literally nowhere else. There's no other real estate to put them on. It is a problem. We've had it with our own infrastructure. I've had our water department move 2 hydrants that were right in the middle. So we are as we, again, I think you could find that pretty widely in a lot of communities where we've made it almost an impenetrable system for someone that's not able-bodied or has a stroller. I think there's a trade-off with, like, it's really hard to get those poles moved, even when we have a federal and state project. We just had a meeting last Monday with 2 department heads and 3 utilities about getting them to move these utilities before we start the project next spring, and we're struggling just to do that. What we're trying to do going forward is not allow any more of this to be, to encumber the system, and as we can, remove the barriers. Every time we do CHIPS, all of the CHIPS repaving we did this year, we also, where there weren't ADA compliant crosswalks, we had to update those. So we're doing them a little bit at a time. It's kind of like you have to know where we want to go, and then each year we're, as we have opportunities to fix here and there, you do. But like on Fishkill, I was disappointed because there's just literally nowhere else to put the poles, and I can't take up more of the road. So we are going to have a couple pinch points there. Now, the one mitigating thing is you do have crosswalks to get you across the street, which will be fully ADA compliant. So again, I'm trying to look at, that's one of the things I wanted to look at with that Metro North last mile study. Like, there's stairs, there's crosswalks that have parking spots right up against them, and there's curbs that have no way to get over them. So again, I think that needs to be the long-term goal. These systems have to be universally accessible. But getting there overnight's just, it's going to take time.
I'm maybe naive here, but I mean, whenever I go past one of the telephone poles, I don't know if it's one that Justice is thinking of, I just want to get my shovel out and dig a little arc, you know, that connects the sidewalk into the grass, you know, grassy knoll right there,
Mhm.
and just, I don't know how to mix cement, but, you know, just throw it down there so that people, you know.
We could teach you how to do that. We
I'd
are,
love to learn how to do that, and.
they've promised to teach me,
I would
yeah.
want a challenge to do it in a day.
all right.
I don't know. I just.
You'll see, we did that on South Avenue, going around the large trees that we didn't want to remove. You have a little jog around. Yeah, I mean, I think we can get there. We don't always own the property. The other impediment for ADA access is just the condition. There's a lot of sidewalks where the tree roots have pushed something up and you can't get over a bump. Like if something's more than a 1/4 inch, it's technically not ADA compliant. Yeah, it's hard to see. I did a sidewalk evaluation as one of my last projects in Ulster County, and I did all of the communities in Ulster, and I graded all of the sidewalks. And really, I can't say that anybody was doing a stellar job other than like the village of Saugerties. And they were doing the ADA ramps that we're talking about, and they're doing, a piece of sidewalk here and there. So I think that's the way to go. Figure out that we want to make the improvement. Try to figure out what the amount is that we put in the capital budget, and then leverage to the maximum extent federal, state, and county money so that we can make that, do more miles. Because we're looking at it's about $1 million a mile for a sidewalk.
Million a mile.
$1 million a mile.
I think the other thing that I'm hearing in Justice's question is, are we, in this discussion, are we going to talk about our priorities? If we want to, we've talked about prioritizing sidewalks around schools. Obviously, Teller Fishkill is a thoroughfare. I would argue Verplank is another thoroughfare that has issues. Is there room in this discussion to start adding that? Try to hone in on our priorities, because I agree that the next steps once we have our priorities is to go for the funding, because we can't just pay for all of this out of our fund balance.
Yeah, I think that's where this heads next. I mean, maybe we have John Clark on to talk about, or some other, somebody who's dedicated to pedestrian planning to figure out, typically when you rate the importance of a sidewalk, these are the factors. Now, for the CDBG for next year, we just looked to do South Avenue because we had a route to school in a low-income neighborhood right along subsidized public housing. And it's like, I needed to do something quickly because they only opened it. It was like, okay, in 3 weeks you have to have a letter of intent in and kind of knowing what you're doing. And it was like, okay, but I mean, that whole area around there, like Wolcott, I think, I think we need to really figure out, if we don't prioritize, we just will never get there. We can't do this all.
You
Right.
can't do it all at once. Yeah.
Right.
So there was a highway department head named Casal, and a council a while ago. And I know we did a map. I know we have a map somewhere.
Yeah, you have a map, but
It's probably old, but I want to go ask Randy, because I want to see.
no, I have the map.
Do you?
Yeah, it's like, but the map doesn't give you the value of
Right.
what's if you have $100,000 to spend, where do you put it?
Yeah, so my recollection is that we started with that and at least identified where there were and weren't sidewalks. And then there was a discussion on prioritization, right? And it was many of the things that people are saying here. I'm wondering if we wrote it down or not, and we can just pull it out. It's not hard to do, but then someone has to kind of go rank or rate, just like, people rate the roads. So I think it'll take a couple of steps. And maybe one of the steps is just kind of, just see what was done the last time, see if there's any records of that, right?
Yeah,
But
and I can
Chris-
talk to the planner and ask if he was doing anything on this one.
Yeah.
Chris, it sounds like you're also saying that there are out there sort of best practices in terms of what the criteria ought to be. Is that, am I hearing you correctly? Or maybe John
I'm
Clark would know.
assuming there are, because I know, like, I didn't administer the program when I was in the planning department, but we had a safe routes to school. So clearly, the federal government said, you know, these major thoroughfares that kids walk to school are a priority. So that one's a pretty easy one. For me, areas that are low income and comply with the CDBG benefit, the primary benefit has to be to low and moderate income people. I think we're going to have that as a funding source for a number of years, so I would build off that. And so I think we can work towards a plan, but I don't think there's, you know, again, I think we could probably look at this from that point of view and figure out what the next 3 or 4 projects are, because it's not like, I mean, like, we priced out South Avenue on the west side. We just did the east side next to the courts. And to do all the way from Davies Avenue down to Wolcott was over $600,000. Now that's 3 years of our allotment. And, you know, what we're going to try to do is see if we can afford to break it into 2 and ask you to put, you know, fund balance into the other piece of it.
What project is this?
So the South Avenue project, like, we did phase 1 this year, which was along the park. Right across the street, those sidewalks are terrible along South Davies Terrace.
Can we have that discussion before we approve that? Because I thought we would have a discussion about what we were using this year's money for before it was.
Yeah, the problem is I had to put a letter of, they had a month in which we had to put a letter of intent of what project. So we've queued up that. Again, I have to have a final, I'm running to do survey work, so I have a basis for even doing the application on the 14th. So again, I think for this year, like, I didn't know they were going to open this and then say, hey, in 30 days you have to have this done.
So I think.
I mean, by the time we have that debate, like, this is going to be gone and closed.
So I would like to just put out there why I'm asking this question, and do you mind if I speak for us with Grove Street? So Ren and I are both concerned. One side is Ward 3 and one side is Ward 4, but Grove Street is a very well-known corridor for school children going to Forrestal. It's also a very steep slope, and it's really dangerous. You cannot see anything, no matter which way you're going, you can't see who's on the other side, and kids are walking up and down that street. And with the construction that is potentially going to begin there with that subdivision, you know, I don't know how that impacts anything, but I'm really concerned about just kind of all the commotion in that area.
Even the Gabion Wall kind of creates a visual distraction. Like, if you're not really accustomed to being on that road, it's you're looking at the wall.
Is it in the eligible mapped area?
It is. I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I looked at the map. The map doesn't have really road by road lines, but
No, it's awful map.
But I think it's in there.
Yeah.
And sorry, and I only bring this up now because we would have brought it up when we thought that discussion was going to take place. But I think it's a legitimate safety concern, and I don't want to detract from anything that you want to do down by South Avenue. But if there's already a new sidewalk there, maybe that's not the priority place to put a second new sidewalk. That maybe we want to have another sidewalk in another school corridor.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that if you already did
No,
all
it
the
just-
paperwork and everything.
I just don't know how we do it. I just looked at the deadline and it's December 9th. You know, and again, I was just trying to line something up. Now, can we do an amendment? I can call and find out.
Okay.
You know, again, and I was asked specifically by the management at Davies, he's saying, you know, hey, you did the one across the street, that's really great, but the kids from our complex don't go across the street there, they go up to Davies Avenue, and then they use, you know, the crossing guard up there.
Yeah, I would hazard to guess that the traffic on South Avenue in terms of pedestrians is very high content because of the school, because of Davies, because of Forrestal Heights, because of the basketball courts. But what I would suggest is this is not a this-year-only process. This is multi-year, and so let's kind of figure out how we're going to do it, and then we'll spread it out.
And if you give me an idea of like what sections of Grove Street are you focused on, like send me a map or something.
Yeah.
And what we can do is we can queue it up for the next round, or we can figure out if we have enough money to do it on our own.
I would say between Liberty and Highland. But we may,
Between Liberty and Highland, yeah.
but you could, I think there is some sidewalk on the level places where there's no, where the hill.
Before the hill.
Yeah, before and after the hill.
Are you
So I think
thinking both sides or one side over another? Which side for
there's not a lot of
sidewalks?
traffic, so one side either,
too narrow.
I don't know which side it goes on. It's narrow, but it's super dangerous. And in the winter, I can't even imagine how.
See, and going back to the ownership thing, I knew I had a willing partner with Davies South Terrace because they said, look, if you don't own the land and you want to move in to do a retaining wall, which we probably will have to do because I don't have enough room without cutting down all the beautiful sycamore trees, then they would work with us. They would basically give us whatever property interest we need to do that funding. Again, we can vet, it just takes a little longer to vet, but we can put it on a list of,
And another area that I think, Chris, you and I had talked about, and I don't know if the CDBG funds on some year or whatever cover this, but it definitely falls within the area they cover, is Memorial Park sidewalk going all the way around. You talked about, wanting to,
well, I mean,
it maybe wouldn't be a
we didn't talk about a sidewalk, we talked about a recreational path, and that's in your capital program.
We're talking
that
about closing that loop.
circumnavigates.
Yes, right.
Right? That's kind of a different beast. It's a asphalt path that's probably more for fitness and recreation. And then we are replacing the sidewalks along the Fishkill Avenue side of that. Yeah, and then there's no sidewalks on Wilk Street on the park side. It's on the other side.
Right, but there is a sidewalk on the Wilk side.
Yeah, there's a recreational path that.
No, on the south side of Wilkes, there is a full
Yes.
sidewalk, the
Yes.
entire length of the block,
Right.
which would be an argument for, don't need another one on the other side. Maybe the recreational path does the trick and, serves double duty, right?
Okay, we'll take a look at Grove.
One other thing too about Grove, because there's that lot at the corner of Grove and Highland that's a new development. I don't know if now is an opportunity to talk to them about their side. I don't know where they are in the planning process, if they have approval or what they'd be open to, but if we wanted to prioritize it, having them help with that could be an opportunity.
Maybe this is a question for Drew. Can I just get a clarification? The homeowners only have to pay 50% of maintenance or any kind of installation. They have full responsibility for maintenance, but there's no.
They have full,
And there's
they have
no.
full responsibility, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
They have full responsibility for maintenance, repairs, and any sort of damages that they have to repair. They have 50% for installing new sidewalks where none previously exist, and they have no responsibility if the city just wants to go and replace an existing sidewalk as part of a road improvement project.
All right, that's what I thought I read. I'd like to have a discussion, maybe tonight's not the night, is that 50% cost of new sidewalks. Because oftentimes, this came up during the Spring Valley Street discussions many years ago, and there was going to be a sidewalk on one side or the other. And people were battling, saying, I don't want it on my side because I don't want to pay the 50%.
Yeah.
So the argument then was, this serves the entire community, the entire block, and everyone that uses it, so it should be shared, citywide. So I think I'd like to revisit that. And,
Right.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it has come up before. And one of the options to deal with it is to say, regardless of what side of the street you put the sidewalk on, if you put a sidewalk on the street, then all the homeowners have the benefit, and you spread the cost structure that way.
Yeah.
Which probably drops it into a reasonable zone, or maybe as well.
Yeah, because it complicates the planning, because people are, some people might like it, see it as an asset, or, improve
Right.
the, the value of their house or something like that, but other people might not want to assume the maintenance, the cost, everything associated with it,
Yeah.
so.
And like the way that we do roads, like DOT has really moved to a preservation first model where they're trying to regularly do the roads like we do so that you don't have to rebuild the whole thing, you just do the top. We're so far off from that, but we might be able to get there. One of the lessons I would take out of it though is the prioritization of of maintaining what's constructed rather than doing new construction. We have so many already constructed sidewalks that are in disrepair. I wouldn't even jump, like I think long-term you do want to fill in your sidewalk system, but I think unless those are strategic little pieces at this point, you're probably better off trying to replace in kind what you have there and upgrade.
I'd like to prioritize safety, particularly safety for school children, before automatically ruling it. I mean, I like the idea of like plugging in gaps, like Grove Street is probably plugging in a gap.
Yeah.
But there are some areas where there's long stretches that I think would benefit from a sidewalk for safety purposes. The ones I know of in Ward 4, one is half complete and one doesn't exist at all.
Yeah. And again, I think if you can take away that disincentive for the sidewalk, people won't fight them as much. They're still going to have to clear them of snow, which is a little bit of a headache.
So it eases the pain. They're not paying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know how we'd start that process of eliminating that part of the code and the fee structure.
Drew, would that would be a local law, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, again, I would be cautious about it simply because, it's expensive and for the entire city, and there is very direct benefit usually to those who live on that street. I think that was the concept. But we can certainly talk about it. We're not going to be able to do a prioritization tonight, right?
No.
Because, we're all going to list our favorite streets, and that won't be, a quarter of what we got to think about, right? So this has been a good conversation. How do we bring it to a close for this evening, and where do we set our next steps?
I'd like to have a conversation with John Clark and just see if he has any suggestions for whether what he's done, find out that, so bring that back, and then figure out if there's like somebody that you actually hire to do this stuff. I mean, there's such specialization these days. I'm sure there's somebody that maps this stuff out and then can say, yeah, these are the top 10 safety concerns.
No, I think you're right, that John will have some very clear views. He probably has some resources too, because, he's been working on Beacon forever, so.
Yeah. Okay.
Can there were just two questions that I didn't get to, if I could just fit them in. One was, with regards to the repair of existing sidewalks and asking the private properties to fix their sidewalk, how often are we actually doing that? I know that we're trying to be kind of nice and
I
Main Street,
don't
but-
try to be nice,
Well, I thought on Main Street you gave everybody a pass.
but I'm not nice about it.
Oh.
I just go and grind them. No, I'm just joking. It's mostly based on complaint and based on claims.
Mhm.
So if somebody trips and falls, the liability falls to the adjacent owner, but they still sue the city,
Mhm.
which is one of the reasons I wanted to do the grinding on Main Street. Like,
Ah.
we know we're going to get sued anyway, because we're the deep pocket. So we've really only done a handful of them
Mhm.
each year.
Okay.
Yeah. And I could go out and find, a few dozen, but I know in a lot of cases, the owners don't have the money to fix them, and, or they'll say, well, why am I fixing my little section when the next two sections are missing, and then there's broken, and.
Yeah.
Um,
And my other question was more related to the 50-50 thing, so when the conversation George asked for, I'll raise my other questions then.
Cool.
I do have a question before we jump off of this, and I think this might be more for Drew, and it's in regards to things that are obstructing sidewalks that aren't necessarily on sidewalks, but like hedges and trees that like come over sidewalks and are, you would have to either move off of the sidewalk in order to pass it, or you have to like really crouch underneath in order to get through. Is there a code around that, or what's our situation?
That goes to the maintenance of the sidewalk as well. The adjacent property owner is responsible for making sure that the sidewalk is accessible and can be walked on. So those hedges should be, cut back or removed, I guess, if it's impossible to cut them back enough. So the city should be made aware of where those exist so that we can, proceed as appropriate.
We issue a lot more citations on that than the physical structure of the sidewalk.
And the intersections too, the blocking the line of sight.
Yes. Yeah. And then if something's blocking our signs and it's coming off private property, we should just clip it. Again, it's just owner is trying to hunt somebody down to cut 2 branches, so we just go in and clear that. But we've gone in and cleared sidewalks and then back billed people for that.
Okay, jumping back to you, Mayor, where you said, what do we want to do for like next steps? I think we could probably all agree that like long-term goal is to have all sidewalks accessible and have sidewalks in places where we need, and that's not going to happen within a year, within 2 years. That's a decades-long project, but I think as a council, I would like to conceptualize some sort of long-term plan to get started and see like where we want to go over the next several years. And of course, that's something that can change, but like it's a mix of needing new sidewalks and also repairing the ones that we have and figuring out what are the priorities or what are our priorities right now. And I'd love to figure that out with all of you.
Yeah, and I think that's what a planner would want to do, is take the long view, and it will help us get a handle on, how big a problem are we talking about, and that will help us decide, how do we do costs? So there's a lot of issues that get solved when you take that long view, and that's what I certainly would like our planner to be doing. So let's take that as instructions to John. Let's see what he's got in terms of resources. He thinks that way. That's what planners do, and I think that is the right approach.
I also just want to say that I really look forward to hearing the insight of fellow council members, because I know several of them have children that walk the streets and play on the streets and know where things might be that we might not even think of. And I'm a council member that doesn't have a car, and so I'm walking all over Beacon all the time, and I trip frequently.
You should sue the city.
I'm not going to
just tell us where the problem.
But yeah, I'm glad that we were able to start this discussion. I want to thank everybody for, yeah.
Everybody good?
Yep.
Okay. 25 Townsend Street. We have a subdivision street naming, so there's a little part of Townsend that's being extended into the old Knights property, right? We want to name that Townsend, is that right?
Think of that.
Goes Townsend all the way there, and we want to continue the name Townsend into there?
This one's Drew. She pulled short.
All right.
Yeah, so this, Mayor, you're exactly correct. In 2018, the planning board granted final subdivision approval. Now they have to name the rest of Townsend Street. The city code requires that the street be named for the continuation. So part of it's Townsend, so the remaining part has to be Townsend. This is just for consistency. It's for safety. It's for 911 to understand where they're responding to. And then the city council is required to confirm the name of the street as Townsend Street. But again, we don't have a lot of discretion here. It is required to be Townsend because it is an extension of the existing Townsend.
Any issues?
All right. We'll have to put Kiriakou Street somewhere else.
So I'll give you the anecdote. When we bought our house, it was 16 Park Avenue. So there was a single block of 9D from Rose Hill to Roundabout that was Park Avenue, because before the arterial was built, which routed 9D from South Avenue over to there was a one-block-long street named Park Avenue. And I'm sitting on the council, and you said 911, which has reminded me of that. So for 911, they were insisting on renaming streets and renumbering streets. And so our 16 Park Avenue, our neighbors 18 Park Avenue were changed to 1076 Wolcott, 1078 Wolcott, with a single no vote on the council, largely smiling but in protest. So I'm okay with Townsend. And Kiriaku's way too hard to spell.
Yeah, you'll
But
never
Park
pronounce
Ave-
it.
Park
Nobody
Ave
can
would have been
pronounce it.
cool, right?
We'd have to do it phonetically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, are we okay to go to operating budget amendments? Last
Goodness,
item.
I hope so.
All right.
I'm doing this one. I just got to pull it up. So we have 2 amendments. I do expect one more round of amendments for the last workshop and last meeting. We have exceeded police overtime.
I was gonna say police overtime.
And I'm just trying to figure out, we've really ratcheted down the rate at which we're using it, but we're still going to be
Is there a
over.
budget item we're doing for Jeff Sims?
No,
No, okay.
Jeff got
Go
cut
on.
from the budget
That
because of
seems illegal.
Susan,
Because he walks out early.
because he leaves. So the first one is moving $52,000 from insurance recoveries to equipment purchase for the police department. This is related to a drunk driver who decided to go over the embankment and crash into 2 of our vehicles one night after some great drinking and wiped out one of our detective cars. So
It's
we're
only
trying
funny
to.
because the driver's fine.
Yes, driver was fine, other than legally. And so we're going to try, that vehicle wouldn't have been retired for a number of years, so we did get a good settlement on it, and we're going to use it to buy an all-electric Mach-E, which
Nice.
we've already tried, so we can thank that individual for helping us to get there. There is a little discrepancy between what we got on this car and the new purchase price. It's about 10 grand. But we did have other recovered monies in this fund that hadn't been allocated. And then the second is
Sorry, I have a quick question about that one. In general, does our insurance cover our replacement of our police vehicles if we had not gotten a new electric one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically what they said is the car that you had was at this level. And what we did is we priced out what the equivalent would be of it was a fully gas-powered vehicle, not a hybrid or anything. So we got a comparable, which was, a replacement value was set at 42 or 43,000, and then the Mach-E is just over 50.
Okay.
So we didn't have to buy that replacement car. We could take the money and basically upgrade that little bit. And for the additional 10,000 to be able to move the fleet along, I thought was worth it. Yeah. And then the second one is the traffic signs that we talked about that monitor speed. Again, one of them has the programmable emojis. The other one is a conventional sign. We did have enough funds in contingency to buy the 2 units, so they're going to be ordered either this or next week so that we can get them out. And thanks for being flexible and not putting that in the budget. I thought we could just do that with what we had left from this budget. So we'll vote on those, and then you'll have one more round at the end of the year, and maybe a cleanup in January once we close our books and we realize, okay, this overran a little bit, this was under a little bit.
So that's 2 electric vehicles on the fleet now?
Yeah, and a hybrid. Well, we have 2 hybrid Ford Explorers. They're called the Intrepid. And we had in our capital program 2 more electric vehicles. So we're making good progress on that. And if they come out with a decent package for the patrol cars are what are tough because they get really beat up. and they need a lot of power, and oftentimes they're at a scene for a long time, running their lights, running their communications, so the battery life is still an issue with them. The hybrids have worked pretty good, though. Yes.
Not on this subject, but before we close out, I have a question.
Okay. Well,
We all good?
so, is this good this time? Okay.
All right.
Great. Yeah, on proposed change to law, to amend Chapter 119, do we have to have a public hearing on that?
Yes, you do, and last week we set the public
Oh,
hearing.
great. Fantastic.
Yeah, so we did that ahead of time, knowing that we were running out of meetings for
Right.
the end of the year, knowing that we would have this discussion in public.
Got it.
Good night, all.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks, Drew.
Good discussion.
Thank you, Drew.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Drew.